All right, welcome back to the Animal House, and I'm the animal. So, we got a couple things we're going to be working on today in the new year. The first one is going to be the fentanyl war. So, we know how on this channel we like to try to tie things that happened in the past with things that are happening today. Um, so, you can see kind of where I'm going to go with this one. And also, let's address that we got the Bill of Rights hung up here, and one of my ancient maps hung up here. This I've had. This was a present. So, thank you. And I have another similar thing to this coming that was another gift, and I believe that will get hung up soon as well. And then if I can figure out some way to work it in back here, at least for the time being in the space that's available, I think my shitty little guitar collection will get put up as well. But that's neither here nor there. We will slowly make things fancier as we get along. Hopefully, the editing and the addition of pictures and things like that that go up or here somewhere, and sometimes here, and then sometimes over this part of my face, um, people are enjoying. So we'll see how we move along going forward. I'm adjusting light. I put another one down, well, down here, and it's shining up over here. So I'm trying to balance it out. So I like the red, and being a ginger, I think it looks good, but bright white light doesn't look good on my pasty skin. But I think the red looks all right. But I wanted to add some over here just so, oh, try it out. Who knows? Let me know what you think. Anyways, all right. So, fentanyl war. What we are going to do is kind of go back to go forward and then go back a little bit. But what I wanted to talk about was kind of a thought experiment to, is China selling fentanyl precursors to the United States market through cartels and other means? Is that a way of them getting back at the Americans, the British, and the French for the opium wars? So we've never done a full video on the opium wars. We will at one time, but I figured this was a little bit more current right now, so maybe we'll do the full opium wars video later, soon, but later, not right now. So the opium wars were 1839 to 1842, and then the second opium wars was 1856 to 1860. And that was mainly Britain's desire to sell opium into the Chinese market for silver, tea, and silk. And the United States kind of got brought into that because they were benefiting financially and kind of economically. And then French was obviously the same thing, or France, excuse me, was the same thing. So now, once again, this is just a thought experiment. There's no confirmation to this. These are just kind of a thought experiment backed up by some facts. Now, I'm not, saying that China's doing this intentionally. I'm just saying that it's very, very interesting. And we're going to touch on some things that kind of, I wouldn't say allude to, because that sounds a little bit more like a confirmation that they're doing it on purpose. But, like I said, it's a thought experiment. So, the fentanyl epidemic is about a drug, and that is in the opium family. Fentanyl is 50 to 100 times stronger than morphine. And from what I was reading while I was researching this, there is a version of it that's even stronger than that. Fentanyl was made initially in 1959 by a Belgian physician by the name of Paul Janssen, and he was born in 1926 and he died in 2003. Now, the interesting thing about fentanyl has a legitimate medical use, surgical, pain relief. The military has fentanyl lollipops, which is like a legitimate like lollipop that is fentanyl. They also have morphine ones. They have opium one or opiate ones. Um, but if somebody's hurt really bad, they'll tape a morphine or opium or fentanyl lollipop in their hand. And that way they can suck on it while they're working on them, in a trauma flight or a trauma transport of some kind. So there is legitimate, or, in a hospital, they use it all the time for surgeries and things like that. From what I understand and what I read, there's some surgeries where that is the primary use of the drug. Is only specific surgeries can be done because of the use of fentanyl. So, there is a legitimate use for it. Now you're going to see I'm going to be referencing both my computer and my notes because there's so much to this that I wanted to kind of keep a bullet point list of things that I thought were very important on my computer, and then obviously my notes from reading, for the amount that I did for this. So the thought experiment, as far as is China doing this on purpose to pay us back for that, right? So China says no. They say, and the CCP leader has been on record saying this, where he says that it's America's weak laws. It's an entirely American domestic issue, which is true. I mean, it's not China's fault that drug addicts here in the United States have gotten so out of control. China also says it's big pharma's opioid corruption. That's a valid point as well. And then American culture has glorified drug use and, mental illness and weakness, basically. Now, before everybody lights me up in the comments, I'm not saying that everybody that has gotten hooked on opiates is weak. Okay, I've been to the hospital where they gave them to me, and I can tell you it was one of the hardest things that I've ever had to get off of. It took me like 9 months to get off of the amount that the physician had me on. And it was one of the most difficult things I've ever done. So I do not want to make light of it. I never understood why people did heroin in the past, because I was like, why would you want to do a drug that makes you all lethargic and like down and sad and whatever? Look, I get it, but you also have to have some personal responsibility and personal control that when it's time to get off, it's time to get off. So that's where that weakness comes from. And I'm not saying it's easy. It's definitely not. But it is possible. Because as a big dude and as a ginger, there's whole medical proof that people that are like full legit gingers like I am have a higher tolerance to drugs and alcohol. When I get dental stuff done, same thing. When I get local anesthetics for, things, same thing. I remember when I had some dental work done years ago, they used like 6 of those syringes, on one side of my face. And I think it was 4 or 5 in the other one. And, he's like, hey, let me know if you feel anything after he did like the proper amount. I'm like, I still feel it. You hit me again. I still feel it. Hit me again. I still feel it. And every time between, they're waiting a little bit. But, there's also a time that the first few are going to wear off where the other ones aren't. So, you got to do it in relatively close proximity. So, look, I get it that it's difficult, but I was on, relatively high dose, and considering, in conversations with people after the fact where they're like, how much were you on? How much were you on? I've never had anybody taking more than I was. And when I used to drink, I was one of those people that could drink anybody under the table. Well, now I'm sober. Off of basically everything that's not a natural product, meaning I do some psychedelics and things like that. I'm not a big weed guy because, again, I don't really like feeling lazy and lethargic. But, some psilocybin and some DMT and, things like that. And, ayahuasca and the toad. And, I've done various amounts of all these things. And, you know, I'm an advocate for responsible psychedelic use for, you know, not so much getting high, but the experience and what it's done for me becoming a calmer person, dealing with some head injuries. I've had quite a few head injuries, and they were having a massive effect on me in a negative way, and I started using psychedelics for that purpose. So I just want to say that, to put this out, that this is not to attack anybody specifically. Um, as far as like, oh, you're a drug addict, you're a bad person. That's not what I'm saying. This is going to be specifically like normal things on this channel where fuck your feelings. These are facts. This is a thought experiment based on facts. But don't come at me where it's like, oh, hey, so and so had this problem and he's a great person. Maybe he is, maybe he's not. Maybe she is, maybe she's not. I don't fucking know. I'm not attacking anybody directly. I'm not attacking a group of people directly. These are just facts. Fuck your feelings. Okay. So back to it. China sells fentanyl precursors to either, individual labs that were maybe legal, illegal. They sell them to cartels. Cartels press them into pills, mix them into cocaine, cut cocaine with fentanyl precursors, or not necessarily the precursors, but cut cocaine with fentanyl because it's so cheap. And, that's killing people in a massive, massive, massive quantity. The police and military in Mexico intervening is an epic fucking failure. The police in the Border Patrol and the military in the United States is an epic failure. And I'm not saying it's a failure on the military and the police's part. I'm saying it's at this point, it's an unsurmountable problem, and the risk and rewards are far too weighted in one direction. Or risk versus reward is far too weighted in one direction. So 70% of men OD from fentanyl. So in 2021, that was 106,699 people. And 70% of those are men. Okay. And just to give you a reference, in 1999, it was under 20,000. Now, what I found interesting from doing the research is I didn't know that they would prescribe people fentanyl as a prescription. I don't know why you would need to have maybe for like cancer treatment or something like that, where you're in so much pain. But I can't really think of anything else that you would need to have something 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine for. Now, there could be other things. I'm not a doctor. I just play one in the closet. So couldn't tell you. So, but I did find out an interesting fact that 44% of the work force decline is responsible due to opiate addiction. So I thought that was very, very interesting. So that's something that I didn't know before. And that's from a United States labor study. Now, I would assume that a good majority of that is just because people nowadays tend to be fucking lazy because the government gives them free shit. And this comes to another point. Nothing is free, especially from the government. They're giving you back your tax money. So it's not free. And I've had people argue, well, it's my tax money, and if they're giving it back to me, great. Okay, sure. But the whole point of paying taxes is to get the things the government is supposed to do as their job, right? And, if they're going to give you back your taxes, then they shouldn't just charge as much in taxes anyways, which I'm a fan of, period, as a libertarian. But I digress. So the American, British, and French Empire Opium War gave China a century or more of issues, and this could be a historical payback. And Quinn Gang, representative of CCP, kind of alludes to that in a few of the speeches that he's done. Now he doesn't flat come out and say it, so don't misunderstand what I'm saying, but he does allude to it. 13.5 million out of 400 million were hooked on opiates in China during the Opium Wars. So that's a massive amount of people. And 25% of that were males. So that's a massive amount of their workload at the time, or their working population at the time. China confiscated 1,400 tons of opium made in India, housed in China, owned by the British, and that's what led to the start of the first Opium War. And about 19 to 20,000 British ground forces fought in China at the time, and China had well over 100,000 military folks at their disposal. 100,000 military troops at their disposal. But the big difference at the time was Britain, France, and the United States had far more experience in war, and they had far more war technology. They had far better rifles, or I guess muskets at the time. They had, cannons. So you had artillery batteries that were far better. You had naval ships that were better. You had paddle wheel gunboats that were better. So these paddle wheel gunboats could make their way up the canals or the sloughs to get up into, not necessarily mainland China, but, get up the bigger rivers into more inland of China. And, the countries other than basically the United States at the time had far more experience warring with their colonial territories to take those over. So there was a lot better military experience. There was a lot better military equipment. There was a lot better, military intelligence and logistics, because of the colonialism in the area at the time. France and the British Empire had close places they could go to and resupply. So it was well over double the losses on the Chinese side versus the British side. And that's what led to the Treaty in Nanking in 1842. The downside to that for the Chinese is, the war part of it was over, but they had to basically give up Hong Kong. They had to give up their no opium. They had to give up a lot of things. The treaties in there, and it was far weighted on the British and French and American side. And those things didn't end until recently, in way more modern history, So China calls the Opium Wars a century of humiliation. So they obviously don't look at it in a positive light. I mean, I don't think anybody looks at that in a positive light. It was a war, but, obviously the Chinese don't look at it, because not only did they get a huge part of their population killed, they had a huge part of their population hooked on drugs. And on top of that, they basically got abused as far as the treaties are concerned, because it was not in their favor pretty much at all. The forced treaties from Nanking were not voided until 1947. So like I said, that's pretty recent if you think about it. I mean, if the last Opium War ended in 1860, and those treaties went until 1947, and Hong Kong, I think, went back to the British in 99, I think it was. Here, let's look that up real quick. When did Hong Probably help if I could spell. Hong Kong, go back to China. There we go. Good old Google machine. 156 years of British rule, and it went back in at midnight on July 1, 1997. So actually, that's earlier than I thought. For some reason, I thought it was like 1999, but whatever. So, they didn't even get rid of the treaties till 1947, and then they didn't get Hong Kong back until 1997. And, even to this day, to today, there's a lot of back and forth in Hong Kong because, they were a democracy there and the rules were completely different than mainland China, and the population in Hong Kong skyrocketed. And, it was an economic and, port hub for a long time. And, obviously democracy and, Britain's version of freedom is far better than the CCP and communism. So you can kind of put that one together on your own. So China's domestic opium market peaked in the early 1900s. So after the treaties, they were producing opium in China. So it wasn't being shipped in from, India and, I think it was mainly just India at the time. But, I was reading in some places it said it was coming in from Afghanistan, but I don't think the opium started going down that way until later on. And so, it was over 34,000 tons of opium produced in the country, and then they still imported over 5,000 tons from out of the country. So that's a massive amount of opium. Now, there was too many different ways to do the conversion of what a ton of opium, like farm grade opium, would be to the equivalency of like opiates, because opiates are measured in what they are compared to morphine, and there's all these different mathematical equations. So I figured it would just be easier to just leave it be. If you really want to know, you can kind of go do the math on your own. And however math problem and fractions you decide to use, good for you. But in 1949, when the CCP took over, they banned all of it. They burned all of the opium fields. They imprisoned, and they called it treatment, but they basically put addicts into forced labor camps. And if they weren't addicts anymore, great, but from what I read in multiple sources, most of them died because they're strung out on opium, and then they go into a forced labor camp and they're having a detox while they're being beat and shot at and starved and whatever else. So you can imagine how little the record keeping was that would be accurate, and how unpleasant that would be. And then by 1953, Mao, the leader of the initial Communist Party in China after the Communist Revolution, declared the entire country drug-free. So, so from 1949, when they took power, to 1953, they solved the problem. But it was a very harsh way to solve the problem. And you can only imagine, the amount of people that died by either detox, being worked to death, being just outright killed. I mean, Mao had all of the people that were transporting opium killed immediately. So that was, quite a few people. It was roughly 1,000 traffickers of opium that were just immediately killed. So, that was a solution with an iron fist. And so the history of fentanyl, like I said earlier, it was made in 1959 by Paul Johannesson. But there's something kind of interesting to understand, that there were kind of developments happening in different areas that were kind of running about the same time, which seems to lead to convenient payback for the Chinese potentially, but also just the facts. And that is that in 1970s, China was starting to open up a little bit. So the labor was very, very cheap. The manufacturing cost was very, very cheap. So a lot of the pharmaceutical industry was made over there. So you had the large pharmaceutical companies that were making drugs overseas. Also, the rules to making pharmaceuticals was far less. So, in that era, China made $100 billion in annual revenue from medicine manufacturing. And the not only was the labor and the manufacturing cheaper, but the scientists for the manufacturing of precursors and the figuring out of how to make the fundamental precursors was far cheaper. So a lot of the R&D was a lot cheaper over there as well. And so in the same rough amount of time, in 1988, the United States approved fentanyl as a Schedule II drug in the USA. And through the 90s and the 2000s, companies such as Purdue and Johnson & Johnson weren't quite super honest about, the whole fentanyl opiate family of drugs, where the prescriptions were flowing. I mean, you stub your toe, here's a bunch of Oxycontin. Here's you stub your toe, here's, oxycodone. You get a toothache, here's some fucking opiates. You break your arm, here's a shit ton of opiates. Like I've known people and heard of people that are hooked on it, and they would go and break a finger or slam their hand in a car door, or, get some minor injury that was painful, to then be able to go get a prescription, because the doctor would be like, here's 100 pills and you can get that every month, kind of indefinitely. And then you had, the pharmacy shopping and stuff like that, where, one person would get one written script and go to multiple different pharmacies and have it filled, or they would buy the script from other people and have it filled. And then the illicit drug market for it kind of went just skyrocketed as well. And there's plenty of documentaries about that part of it. I don't really think we need to cover that, but through the 90s and the 2000s, the pharmaceutical companies were not being super honest about the downsides to the drugs, about the addiction possibilities of the drugs, and it was being oversupplied for very, very minor things, which then leads to the government making massive oversteps and trying to fix it. And all it did was get people to turn to street drugs, and now lead to the problem that we're talking about now, where the cartels are supplying massive quantities of street drugs at far, far cheaper than making heroin. And they're getting the precursors dirt cheap from China and now India, or Chinese manufacturers are going to India because of the trade embargoes and, the laws that are being sanctioned against China because of that. And they're going into India to manufacture or sell or supply. And that way it just kind of moves right around. And China and India share a common border for quite a few hundred, I think it's a couple thousand miles, not hundreds, sorry, excuse me. So the government just made arbitrary rules to make getting prescriptions far more difficult. So people went to street drugs, heroin, fentanyl, and, China was there to fill the void. So, once again, like Sun Tzu said, and I'm paraphrasing, if your enemy's making a mistake, don't get in their way. So whether they're doing it on purpose or it was just a, kind of convenient happenstance of what was going on, but they're definitely, definitely, taking advantage of it in full view. So the in 2017 was the first time that any action was taken against this, and the Trump administration had put political pressure on China, and China outlawed the export of fentanyl products from the U.S., and it was called the Stop Act. And because of that, China supposedly started to do something about it, but the underground market in China is huge. The underground market in Mexico is massive, and the illicit market in the United States is, obviously driving it all. Um, so the Chinese government already takes a hard line on drugs. Like, almost any drug crime in China, from what I read, is a death sentence. So, it's not like it's bothering their economy and their people. Like, they learned this lesson already. But, Americans look at that as a harsh penalty. So, we have to kind of look into the benefit for China. So the vast majority of men 18 to 45 are the most affected by this opiate epidemic. And the deaths among the troops have almost more than doubled from 17 to 21, from 2017 to 2021. Oops, excuse me. So, um, you know, it once again, it benefits them. Whether they're doing it intentionally or not is a completely different story. So, we just have to understand that that's just kind of what's going on, and whether they're doing it on purpose or not. So, what are some of the things that we can do? Um, like I said, Sun Tzu, if your enemy's making a mistake, don't interrupt them. Interpretation: the U.S. struggles with an opiate addiction, might be viewed as a self-inflicted problem, or an external intervention may not be necessary. Um, so what could we do? Well, there's a few things we can do, right? We can look at it as the efforts to get the drug and the drug use are so prolific. You know, leftist rules, like politically leftist rules, are a lot softer on those things. So is it a political thing? And let's not just look at the drug part of it. Let's look at why potentially people are using these drugs. You know, leftist rules or leftist ideology doesn't want the atomic family anymore. We're subsidizing, single family households. So now the government has become the spouse in some families. Once again, the free shit that is being given out, and nothing is free. You're going to pay for this stuff somehow. The complete detonation of the middle class because of, both, I guess, Republican and, leftist, across the aisle stuff. When, the Clinton administration sent the manufacturing jobs overseas in 98, we talked about that in a different video. Our economy currently is absolutely, in the United States and most places, is absolutely in the toilet. Now, here in the United States, that's almost solely due to Bidenomics. Because when, our 45th president was running stuff, the economy was banging. We didn't have wars going on all over the place. We had the current wars that he kind of inherited. But what I'm saying is wars going all over the place, as far as like the entire world every continent seems to have wars going on. Well, not every continent. I don't know if the penguins and shit are pissed off and, they're fighting each other, but the continents with people on them. And then we got to look at the mental health side of things, right? In the Reagan administration, the United States got rid of all of the state and federal run, like, mental hospitals and drug places. So now it's kind of private or nothing, and that's crazy expensive. And a lot of the times when you see people out on the streets that are drug addicts, they either had beforehand or have done drugs so long that they are currently, mentally ill. I mean, they're just completely gone. So you walk out into any metro city, pretty much across the United States, and a lot of rural places as well now, because it's just spreading like, what's worse than cancer? Like, I don't know. It's just spreading like wildfire. And people are screaming at lamp poles. They're defecating in the streets. They're shooting up everywhere. They just don't care. It's just anywhere, everywhere. Um, so, we can have those facilities with better oversight. That would have been a far better option than just to get rid of them altogether. So we've got to look at that part of it. We can, try to do military or police or some combination of the strikes of the cartels, but you got to be careful with that, because if you don't have the support of, let's say, Mexico, and you start militarily striking their citizens, good, bad, or otherwise, in their country, then that could potentially cause a problem. And as much of Mexico being vastly corrupt governmentally and politically speaking, the United States and Mexico are tightly knit together because, one, we're bordering each other. We have a lot of cultural flow back and forth, and also, the economics of other things that aren't illicit drugs. So we got to be careful with that. Would it work in the short term? Sure. Would it be something we could do as well as doing other things? Absolutely. But we would definitely have to look at the political partnership between the two countries. And there has been some of that already happening to a very, very small degree, but the Republican caucuses here in the United States are definitely wanting to take a far firmer action in that area. We just got to be very, very careful with it. And then the last thing is move the scheduling of the drug from Schedule 2 to Schedule 1, and treat it like heroin, treat it like other illicit drugs that are quote unquote illegal. And then the hiccup with that is if you take a medical grade drug and you move it to Schedule 1, you still have to make sure that people can get it through medical needs and not have these overreaching from the government, right? So, there's those things. So, this is just something that I thought would be interesting to look at. We like to look at historical things that are currently, relevant to today. So, you know, um, it's just one of those things that we once again have to work out together. Republican, Democrat, Libertarian. I personally am a firm believer in the war on drugs was an epic failure. It was a failure almost from Jump Street. We have a government that allowed something like the Contra Wars, where they were allowing drugs to be sold into urban communities to pay for a war in another country because they didn't want to admit that they were having something to do with it. We did a whole video on that. Go check it out. Um, so, again, how do we know that something like that is not happening now? And, and if you really want to look into, the different areas, personally, I think it is. So, I personally believe that you should allow all drugs to be sold through pharmacies, so the manufacturing, the dosage, and so on and so forth. And then it's up to personal responsibility to, deal with that. And if you become an addict and you drive yourself into the poorhouse, you shouldn't get any help. That's on you. It shouldn't be tax money taking care of you. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't offer people a solution for an out, but let's say we give them one or two chances. And outside of that, you go to jail and you can detox in jail. Maybe not make the crime something that's going to fuck you up for the rest of your life where you can't get a job and re enter the community. But, if you can go buy drugs in our economy from our pharmacies, so the dosage, the cleanliness of it, the manufacturing of it, and you choose to abuse it, you can do it with booze, you can do it with, you can drive too fast, you can drink too much, you can, anything you can abuse. So the fact that we want to like over-regulate it and do all this crazy shit, at least if we're selling it through our pharmacies and our economy, we're not giving trillions of dollars to cartels, and then we're also not spending billions of dollars to then fight them after we're allowing, our population to give them money. Granted, it's not a perfect solution, but I think it's a better solution that needs a little bit more, work than what we're currently doing. So, on that note, we'll see you guys on the next one. Let me know in the comments what you think. Share with your friends, like and subscribe. Thanks, guys.